Welcome back to the MTV studio for part 2 with Dr. Marino. I had more questions.
Well, thank you.
And I'd just love to dig in a little bit further because I've worked with spine surgeons for a long part of my career. And what would you say to those docs who are using local bone and they're calling us autologous?
So what I would say is that they're not directly comparable. And there have been a number of studies to look at this issue. Local bone is, of course, convenient, and it's a byproduct of the decompression. So one would like to use it, and there might be instances where you would use it depending upon how well you segregate the bits of fibrous and cartilaginous tissue, which normally come with removing lamina and facet joints. There's just not a lot of cancellous bone there. And really the primary osteoconductive element that we look for in bone grafting comes from the cancellous bone.
Right.
And as far as the osteoproliferative, yes, there could be some cells that survive the process, but the osteoinductive is not going to be there to the same extent because when we deal with DBMs, we have essentially treated them with hydrochloric acid, so we're exposing these proteins. And that's not the case with local bone. So you've got a combination of not that good for osteoconduction, a small amount of osteoproliferation, and not very good for osteoinduction.
Right.
Whereas cancellous bone from the iliac crest or other repositories will have all three of those elements.
Sure.
And in one study in which they blinded the observers, they did multi-level fusions, and these were posterolateral fusions, which are more challenging than interbody fusions. And when they blinded the observers as to whether it was local bone versus iliac crest bone, they found that in multi-level fusions, the fusion rate with local bone was 22%.
Wow.
Versus with iliac crest bone was much closer to 70%. So they're not the same. And Jeff Wong did a study with athymic, either mice or rats, I can't remember which animal, and he found a significant difference in bone production when he used human local bone versus human iliac crest in these mice which had been immunologically compromised. So they're not the same,
Right.
but it's very convenient, and I'm finding that a lot of the newer products are comparing themselves to autograft, but when you look at what is the autograft, it's local bone, which is an inferior bone grafting material.
I'm really glad you made that distinction because I think just in the vernacular, as people refer to things,
Yeah.
things take on different meanings.
Yes.
Why? And I think it may be because that harvesting is difficult. So why? Maybe that's a good segue into the COREX device. Like, what is it about COREX versus anything else that's on the market?
Yeah. So when we designed the COREX device, and I have an example here, the number one priority was to make it safe. And we wanted it to be effective and safe. And we think we achieved those objectives by incorporating a number of features. One is we don't need to use a power instrument or a power drill. We have a tree fine on the end of the instrument, which has a shoulder stop, which limits the depth.
Yep.
And since this is a percutaneous procedure and you can't see the cortical breaching, the tactile ability, that proprioceptive, if you will, feedback that allows you to tell when you've created a cortical window is very helpful. Mm-hmm. The other thing is it's an all-in-one instrument. Once you take off the cortical breaching element, which we call a trocar tip, we have a tree fine, which is attached to the handle, and we have a delivery method which does not require you to remove it or take it apart as some of the other systems do.
Right.
The other main thing is we're not harvesting morselized pieces of bone. We're harvesting segments of cylindrical bone which are structurally minimally altered. And we know from animal experimental studies that the more you morselize bone, the more you impact it, the more you deform the architecture, the less it's going to be able to integrate and for osteoproliferation to take place. So we also don't separate the elements We don't take the marrow elements out. Some of these devices use suction, and that's their way of capturing. We have a mechanical capture, which is very reliable. It's one of our patents that we have on the device. And so we don't separate those native cells from their local environment, which highly influences how they're going to behave.
Yep.
So there's a lot of reasons. The safety of using a manual device, we can hear, feel, and that whole process of transmitting what the tip of the instrument is doing into the surgeon's hand, we think is very valuable and protective.
That's awesome. Thanks for the explanation. It
Sure.
makes sense to me. So from a surgeon's, we'll close here with this.
Sure.
There may still be a reluctancy to harvest based on some of the challenges and positioning or whatnot.
Sure.
What would you share to those surgeons, your peers?
Sure. Well, I would say this, you know, try to become familiar with the traditional bone harvesting sites, like the posterior superior iliac spine, which is a very large target. You just need to know which way the pelvis is oriented in the prone position. But in the supine position, the anterior crest, while it's still a place to harvest bone, is a little more difficult because it's a thinner, thinner crest on the top.
Right.
And I would ask the surgeons to consider the proximal tibia. The proximal tibia is a very easy target, just about 1 or 2 finger breadths medial to the upper pole of the tibial tubercle. It's subcutaneous. There's no nerves or blood vessels of any consequence that can be injured. You make a small incision and you can harvest a 1 or 2 level interbody fusion from the proximal tibia. And the experience of surgeons who've tried it has been very favorable, very favorable.
That's amazing. Well, I appreciate you coming back by the studio to share a little bit more detail about not only the product, but the challenge that this solution addresses. And so, yeah, I really appreciate your time today.
I appreciate your having me back.
Hey,
Thank you very much.
It's great to see you again.
Same here. Take care.
Have a good show.
Thank you.